Welcome. The purpose of this session is to consider the differences between public and private sector financial models and explain their implications to online learning. Let's begin with some analysis questions. First, distinguish between public and private sector organizations. Second, how are the aims and purposes of public and private sector organizations different? Are there any similarities? And finally, how do revenue and cost models differ in public and private sector organizations? Let's start by distinguishing between public and private sectors. These words refer to ownership. Is it publicly owned, that is by citizens, or is it privately owned by individuals? Public sector refers to any organization that is owned by citizens and operated by governments. That includes federal, provincial, and municipal. That would include most universities and school districts. The goals of public sector organizations vary, and they have to do with solving specific problems that affect citizens. The private sector is made up of organizations that are privately owned and not part of the government. In addition to for-profit corporations, this sector also includes non-profit organizations, partnerships, and charities. The private refers to the fact that they are privately owned, not necessarily whether or not they're concerned with a profit motive. This can all get a little confusing when we hear that a company has an initial public offering or a company's gone public. That doesn't make it a public sector organization. That just means it's available on the stock market to individuals who are members of the public to purchase it. Now we'll take a look at the financial management for each with respect to online learning. I'll quickly go over a few key financial concepts here, though we'll revisit them in more detail later on in the course. First off, financial management refers to the allocation of resources, including managing incoming money and spending money in the operation of the organization's activities. Financial management also involves oversight or monitoring the flow of money. Revenue means how much money is coming into the organization. A private sector organization usually gets revenue through sales to customers, but they might get it through other means as well. A charity might get it through fundraising. Public sector organizations get revenue through a variety of sources that can come from transfers, grants, taxes collected, and so forth. Expenses refer to the costs associated with doing business. There are all sorts of expenses: salaries, supplies, rent, and so on. We manage revenue and expenses in budgets. And finally, profit is how much is left over when expenses are subtracted from revenue. For-profit organizations in the private sector are usually looking to maximize profits. And if they're corporations, they might be concerned with maximizing shareholder value, that is, the value of stocks of the corporations. This means when they're either delivering online learning to clients for a fee or training their staff, they're concerned with how the design, development, and implementation of learning or training activities will impact on the bottom line, meaning profits. Not-for-profit and public sector organizations are typically not concerned with profitability or shareholder value. Certainly, revenue and expenses are a concern. Often, these sorts of organizations look for cost recovery so that they don't lose money on any online learning or training. Now let's take a look at a public university as an example of a public sector online learning provider to gain some insight into the financial considerations for online learning. In Ontario, public universities like UOIT obtain grants from the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities, known as MTCU, to fund operations. MTCU is a provincial ministry overseeing higher education. Universities receive both capital grants for infrastructure and operating grants for day-to-day operations. Together, these grants, along with tuition and money collected through fundraising, make up the university's revenue. The most recent data available for 2008 to 2009 from the Council of Ontario Universities lets us know a little bit about how revenues work in Ontario's publicly funded universities. Combined, all of Ontario's universities received $3.2 billion in operating grants, which was topped up by $2.6 billion they collected in tuition fees. As a point of comparison, in 2008 to 2009, UOIT received a total of $46.5 million in ministry grants. On a per-student basis, these provincial grants average at about $8,000 per student for all of Ontario. That's a lot of revenue to manage. This figure from the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance illustrates how Ontario universities spent their funds. Take a careful look at the pie chart and make note of any questions that it raises. Where do you think the costs associated with online learning are in this figure? Make sure you review Section 1 of Public Sector Financial Management for Managers, available in our course website. It'll give you additional information and help you understand some of these key concepts a little bit better. Let's take a look at the synthesis questions. First of all, what's the difference between public and private sector organizations? Second, describe the similarities and differences in financial considerations for online learning for public and private organizations. Finally, what would be the key knowledge, skills, and competencies necessary to be successful in financial management in either the public or the private sector?